Nelson Mandela's name carried weight not only politically and culturally, but also economically, and the end of apartheid proved to be a tremendous financial boon to South Africa.
Here to discuss this and more is Arise business editor Andrew Schmertz. Andrew, welcome.
Hey, Andrew, welcome to the show.
Well, you know, as the interview with Mrs. Rock seems to show, he made friends with people from across the spectrum, and even in the business community. Richard Branson, the CEO of Virgin Group, tweeting that he mourns the loss of his closest and dearest friend.
Wow.
Who knew, right?
Who knew?
Right.
So it's really an incredible story.
Wow. So tell us a little bit more about the economical background, because what impact did apartheid and Nelson Mandela's freedom have on the economy of Africa and South Africa?
Nelson Mandela always linked political progress with economic progress. And you know, we've been talking about his transformation as a political leader when he was in prison, but he made a huge economic transformation as well. He was an early embracer of Leninism and had a picture of Lenin over his office. But by the time he came out, he realized or decided to go down the path of capitalism and embracing what was already in place in South Africa to make the country better. And the change the country underwent when apartheid fell is dramatic. You know, repression is not good economic policy.
No.
And the leaps and bounds that the country made are just under his term. He served 5 years as president, one term. The nation's GDP doubled from 1.5% to 3%. Now, that 3% number in the United States may not look so good, but keep in mind, this was a country back then where 50% of the people did not have electricity.
Wow.
So it is a dramatic increase. Incomes rose 62% over 20 years, 93% for blacks. But incomes across the board rose for everybody once the economy started to pick up. And those attending college now stands at about 70%. Still a low number, but it was 50% 10 years ago.
My goodness.
And you can look at what he did inside the country, but you got to also look at what he did for the rest of Africa. Because South Africa has become the continent's largest economy. And so that has pulled up countries surrounding it. For example, once apartheid fell, they were able to join the Southern Africa Development Community, which is a free trade group in Africa. Before apartheid fell, during apartheid, the country had $16 billion of imports a year. That number rose to $68 billion by 2008.
From 16
to $68 billion. Wow. So imagine the impact that has on the other countries. But also South Africa invited migrant workers to come in.
Yes.
And what that meant is those workers earned money and then sent that money back to their countries. And so South Africa has always been standing for the past 2 decades as sort of the example.
Not only building his country, but other countries at the same time.
Other countries as well.
Now, some have said that the impetus for ending apartheid was more an economic impetus and not a moral one. What do you think, Andrew? I mean, it's a matter of opinion, of course, but clearly it helped South Africa tremendously.
Well, when you're talking about sanctions, I think they're linked. Okay, because you can have moral outrage, but if you're not going to do anything about it,
that's true.
What can you do about it? Unless you're going to go in there with armed conflict. And so the outside world could only really impose sanctions. Sanctions were punishing to the South African government, to the South African people, to the leadership in South Africa. And those decades of sanctions and the punishment that hit the country led to what began as secret negotiations in the 1980s with the ANC, and then eventually to what was a peaceful, if you will, revolution. And you know, Ronald Reagan had vetoed the sanctions. The United States Congress, bipartisan effort, overturned his veto, the first time in history that a foreign policy by a president was actually overturned by a veto.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it was a pretty dramatic moment.
Well, you know, things have gotten better, but there are still some challenges that South Africa is facing economically. What are some of those challenges?
Well, unemployment is stubbornly high. The number is at 25%, and some people question whether that number is too low. That was the main challenge. The income gap between whites and blacks is still significant. Whites earn 8 times more than blacks. In fact, the income gap actually worsened after apartheid ended. And if you think about reasons why, you had white people were owning the corporations and the businesses. So when sanctions went away, they did better.
They did better.
That number has started to equalize a little bit, but the income gap still is significant. There's still swaths of poverty in South Africa. It still has an extensively high HIV rate. This country has a lot of challenges, but the hope is they have the infrastructure now in place and the system to improve.
And hopefully people will continue fighting Mandela's dream and making the world and South Africa a better place.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew. You're always so good.
Glad to be here. You guys make it good.
Thank you.
And you're watching Arise Entertainment 360. That was